a lot of people, when they think about brand, literally just think about the visual aspect of it, or some of the strategy behind how you get to the visual aspect of it. And they don't always think about it in the way that many of us do, where it's really holistic and about the points of connection you make externally and internally, and the experiences that you foster and deliver. And Spotify has to be one of the kind of exemplars of what it's like to build experiences for its customers and end users through music, which is so emotional and personal and valued and important in our lives. So I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of an insight into how you think about brand experience and building experiences from that brand-led lens, as opposed to just any other lens that you might care to put on it.
Sure. I think I mentioned, it's funny, the old school brand marketer in me, there's a couple of words that come to mind, and that's consistency, cohesion, right? Making sure that you're showing up in the same way regularly in the eyes of the consumer. And that's, sort of the mainstay of how you build a brand, I think. But in order to do that in a way that feels authentic and also interesting, right? I think at the end of the day, that's something I always try to remind myself is like, you want to be interesting as a person. You also want to be interesting as a brand. And if you're not interesting, no one pays attention to you. It doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're saying. And so in order to show up consistently and with cohesion in an interesting way, you really have to be unpredictable and you have to be flexible, right? And I think that was something that, because we built the foundations of our brand at like a hyper growth stage for Spotify, that was a huge part. And I don't know how intentional this actually was, to be honest with you. I think we thought through it, but looking back and reflecting on it more, I'm like, oh, we did that in the right way. You have to allow for that growth and that expansion and for that change to happen in a way that feels consistent and cohesive. And so I think that for us is where we anchor ourselves from a brand perspective across the board. And when you speak about brand experience and all of the various experiences that we build out as a brand, they have to be Spotify first, but sometimes they're Spotify plus Harry Styles. Sometimes they're Spotify Wrapped, our biggest brand moment of the year. Sometimes they're, Spotify plus the Michelle Obama podcast, right? So like there needs to be an opportunity for us to evolve and change and be unpredictable in that, because all of the things that we do and all of the marketing work that we do is pretty unpredictable. It's like pretty random, right? Like we're talking about ourselves as a brand. We're talking about the product features that we have. We're talking about all of the content on our platform, which, as we know, is like soup to nuts, right? So we had to allow for so much room within that consistency and sort of like cohesion. And I think we did a really great job of that when we were building out our, the mainstays of our brand, like our brand position and like our visual identity system and our brand strategy and understanding of our audience. That said, we've done more brand repositionings at Spotify than I can probably count on one hand. And that's because the business is constantly evolving. And so I think understanding like what you hold tight to and where you're just have to be up for that evolution and change is also a huge part in us delivering brand experiences that just also feel true to who we are as a brand, right? Yeah.
That makes total sense. And I think, especially with a lot of these younger businesses, although they're well established now, that start from a sort of technology stack, they often don't conceive of themselves in a way that's limited to just one narrow outcome or avenue. So they're always looking for another opportunity and how they're going to grow. And I know with the work we did with Uber, for example, what might have started out as a kind of ride sharing app is now a mobility platform. And the same will be true, of course, for Spotify. So as a brand leader in the midst of that, it totally makes sense that you're thinking along how you make use of the full set of what you can and how you make it relevant as the business is growing and moving forward. So this idea of being unpredictably consistent in a way is great. Is there anything else that you apply? Like, do you always start with a kind of flexible mindset, as in the future could be very different to where we are today, so I'm not going to put too many restrictions? How do you get to some level of cohesion and consistency? What are the things that bind you? that are
Yeah,
satisfying?
it's great. I think, of course, Viz ID, visual identity, and definitely tone of voice have carried us through all of our changes and evolutions. I think accepting a work in progress mindset as a brand was a huge sort of this the moment when I decided to accept that and recognize that was maybe part of who we are, right? And that was maybe something that was really interesting about who we were as a brand. The fact that we could build a brand on the sense of being always changing and being sort of that unpredictable, and that maybe we're ahead of things that you don't even know we're ahead of yet, right? And welcoming that into like part of who we were as a brand allowed us that sort of flexibility that I mentioned earlier. And so I think that's a huge part of what grounds us in the day-to-day, and what certainly allows us to kind of build on all of the experiences that we have in the past towards like our vision for the future, which our vision for the future might change year to year, right? So I think it's like always recognizing that being in that sort of like fluid space is okay. And maybe that's who we are. And maybe that's really cool, right? Because there's not a lot of other brands that are built around that. And so, yeah, that's I think a lot of like how we've started to weave all of the pieces together and maintain some sense of consistency, but also like, again, like the interesting elements that make us sort of like unpredictable and up for anything. And I think like that's like the spirit of Spotify, but also I think our brand that I think is really pretty incredible.
And from an internal perspective, you've built a team now that you lead and you're working with. How do you pass that along in a way that then makes it actionable and easy for others to kind of respond the way that you would? Do you have to codify it? Is it about the people you employ? Because you're talking often about quite emotive character-led things as much as you are outcomes, which perhaps are intangible when you first start.
It's true. That's a really wonderful question. It's both, I think. I always say, it's funny, flexibility is the most important characteristic to have in order to be successful at Spotify. And I think I've learned that firsthand from hiring people who came from really rigid backgrounds where they're getting really, really clear direction about everything that they need to deliver on. And I think if you're someone who is going to join this organization and get halfway through a project and that project is going to die or change or get tabled or wait until the product catches up to it or all these other things, and that's going to be a demotivating experience for you, then you probably aren't going to be very happy at Spotify and maybe not that successful. So I definitely think it's something we consider when we hire 1000%. And I think people, from my experience, most people, once they experience that and they see how much we learn through that experience as a brand, then they're up for it again, right? Because we do a really good job of taking a second and recognizing like both what we're good at and what we're not good at, and recognizing that we're building this playbook in real time. And I say that whenever I interview people, and I say it to my team regularly, like, remember, that's not a bad thing. Like, we're not doing something that anyone else has ever done. Like, think about it that way. Like, we're doing something that's the right thing for our business and for us and for culture at this moment in time. No one else has ever done that. There have always had other variables to play with. And so when you keep that in mind, the opportunity feels huge and exciting and sexy and interesting, and you want to keep going, and it keeps you motivated. And so, I mean, that's how I feel about it. And so I haven't struggled to find people to also buy into that, right? And I think it keeps us all in it together, and recognizing that you do have massive influence over how we want to show up in the world every day. And this project might not be it. We might realize 50% of the way through or 25% of the way through, it's not it right now, but there will be another one, and we know there will be, and we'll uncover it.
It strikes me that Spotify is driven by innovation and invention, and it feels like it's quite inherent. Does that mean there's loads of people running around trying lots of stuff all the time, or is there a way that that's kind of managed and harnessed or happens in a particular play? How extreme is that in the organization? I'd love to get a bit of an insight what it feels like is from your side of the fence.
Yeah, there's a ton of innovation. And I think in the earlier days, and maybe I don't want to misspeak, but in the earlier days, I was closer to it. I'll say that because our organization was a lot smaller. So what was happening on the product side of things affected our day-to-day more. I still believe there is a ton of autonomy in the organization, across the board, which is also a thing that I think is really amazing and exciting. But at the same time, people are sort of like grounded in what they're here to deliver. And so I believe that a lot of that innovation happens on the product side. We solve for it in structure on the marketing side. So we have people and teams that are dedicated to innovating in specific spaces. I will say there's across the board at Spotify an experiment and learn mentality, unlike anything I've ever seen, where it's fully okay to fail. And I think creating that type of environment just creates a safe space for everyone. That's why we have crazy retention rates and people love working at Spotify, because you can, again, like we're going to learn from it and we're going to maybe decide that our playbook is not to do that again. It's to try it this way instead. And we're all kind of in that together. And so there isn't really a fear of failure. I mean, as a company, we've tried things and just decided like to abandon them halfway through or 25% of the way through. And like, maybe that's not the direction we're going to go in. And so that trickles down all the way from like top leadership through the organization for sure. But there's so much innovation and spirit. And I do think the product side of the organization has also tried to like harness that and like formalize it. So we have like hack weeks and things like that, but it's constant. And certainly something that I feel I do miss from the work from anywhere, work from home environment is like that sense of that, because you could see it in the day-to-day in the office. And certainly like being in the role that I'm in the organization, I feel further from it now.
Yeah, I think so many of us can relate to that. It's great to have periods at home where you can be really productive, but you also just need there, as we talked about earlier, those kind of serendipitous moments where you trip over stuff happening around you that is so magical. Thinking about your role with the team, is there anything that you'd share with me around how you lead the team, or things that you found have been particularly kind of useful and helpful in how you manage the team dynamic in some of the places that you've been, which are, they're high energy, they're culturally embedded, they're immediate in terms of a lot of the data that you can get, and it's fast moving. So it'd be really interesting to get some thoughts from you about kind of how you lead a team and keep them motivated in such an environment.
It's the forever challenge, is being the type of leader you want to be, right? Or the type of leader you want, I guess is the right way to phrase that. I personally have found a lot of success, not to oversimplify things, but in just being human first and seen as the empathetic leader in the room. And I think it's the thing that has set me apart as a leader in my experience at Spotify and in other places, and welcoming and opening yourself up to the sort of human connection that comes in being that person for someone else. At the end of the day, it's, after a day full of work, it's hard to sometimes make that mental space for the 30-minute one-on-one at the end of the day. And you're like, I just kind of need to close out my emails and be done for the day. But I personally rarely regret making space and time for that. I think like having the coffee, taking the person to lunch, making sure that you have time for even quarterly one-on-ones, split level check-ins with people across every level of the team, and that you have that real human first connection with someone is the way that I lead the best. And I think it's because you then understand what's going on throughout the whole team and the organization. You start to understand the challenges that you're really far away from, and you start to see maybe there's just some context they're missing here, right? Or maybe I just need to explain this and why this decision is being made. And when you it's not rocket science, right? I mean, I kind of think about it all the time, and I'm like, this isn't really that hard. It's just about making time and space for people and making sure that everyone has all of the information transparently, right? I think transparency is so huge, and we sometimes aren't as transparent as we want to be, not because we don't want to be transparent, because it takes a lot of energy and time to be that transparent, right? That means you have to explain all of it. You have to give all of the information. Transparency is about all of the information being out there. Like taking the time to give that information is sometimes the challenge. It's not. And so it really, like, I think I haven't necessarily solved for how you do that at massive scale, right? I mean, I have a really big team, and I do think I do my best to make sure that we have FaceTime together, or that when someone joins, the first thing I do is like reach out to them and say, like, please find 30 minutes on my calendar so we can chat. Because building that like connection and shared experience from the get-go creates this environment when someone's having a challenge, they know they can come to you, right? And so I think it's about building that two-way communication from the start, the second someone joins the team, and making sure that you have like the regular time for team meetings and for sharing all that context, which sometimes just feels like it's a daunting task to do, but I think it's ever important. And I think so many of the mishaps and misunderstandings that happen across teams and organizations is because people just don't have all the information. Like leadership makes the decisions they make usually for a very logical reason. And so when you're able to share that logic with your teams, then people don't have to guess, or they don't have to make up the story as to why this decision was made or this decision wasn't made. And so I think it's that simple, really, just making time for people and just making sure that you're sharing all of the context and all of the conversations that are happening at a super high level with the team, so they have all that information. Also, everyone learns from that too, right?
I think that's such an important point that you've made there, in terms of as you start to become more of a leader, and as your team grows, such a large proportion of your job is simply about communicating really effectively, and as you say, in a very personal, kind of human-led way, as opposed to just technical expertise and know-how or anything else. And then, of course, as you scale, making sure you've got the team that can do the things that you're not around to do. Your job just changes, doesn't it? And the things that you need to focus on just change quite naturally. And it can, I think it's one of the most interesting transitions you make in your career, is how you plot your way through that in a way that feels comfortable, because it does feel like quite a kind of step change, I think, for a lot of people.